Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Earth's Pride, watching the impossible sight before him. The massive alien ship hung in space like a dark mountain made of metal and strange lights. It was 10 times bigger than his own vessel and looked nothing like any human design. The curves and angles seemed wrong somehow, as if built by minds that thought differently about everything. His communication officer turned to him with wide eyes. The young woman's hands shook as she worked her controls. She had been trying to establish contact for 3 hours since the alien ship appeared without warning near Jupiter. Now something was finally happening. The main screen flickered and showed a face that made everyone on the bridge step back. The creature had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its elongated skull. Its skin looked like polished stone and changed colors as it spoke. When it opened its mouth, Jake saw rows of crystalline teeth that caught the light. The alien spoke in perfect English, which was the first shock. The second shock was what it said. Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire looked directly at Jake through the screen. Its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The creature explained that it represented an empire that controlled thousands of star systems across the galaxy. It had been watching humanity for some time and found them to be a young species, with potential but also with dangerous tendencies. The alien continued speaking in its cold, mechanical way. Humanity had exactly 30 standard days to make a choice. They could surrender all territory beyond Earth's solar system and accept vassalage under the Zephyrian Empire. In return, they would receive protection and guidance as they slowly earned the right to expand again under proper supervision. The alternative was complete annihilation of the human species. Jake felt his blood turn cold, but kept his expression neutral. He had been an explorer and diplomat for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Behind him, his crew worked silently, but he could feel their fear and anger mixing together in the small space of the bridge. The Admiral explained that 847 different species had been given this same choice throughout galactic history. Every single one had chosen surrender once they understood the power of the Zephyrian Empire. It was the logical choice for any intelligent species that wanted to survive and eventually thrive under proper guidance. Jake found his voice and asked how many ships the Empire had sent to enforce this ultimatum. The Admiral's expression changed slightly in what might have been amusement. Over 50,000 warships were currently traveling toward Earth's solar system. They would arrive in exactly 30 days to receive humanity's answer. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Jake and his crew staring at a blank screen. The alien ship disappeared as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving no trace except the recording of their conversation and the terrible knowledge of what was coming. Jake immediately ordered a course back to Earth at maximum speed. During the 3-day journey home, his science officer, Dr. Lisa Grant, worked frantically to analyze every second of the alien transmission. She was humanity's leading expert on theoretical alien biology, and her preliminary findings were disturbing. The Zephyrian appeared to be part of a highly ordered society where individual thought was discouraged in favor of collective efficiency. Their technology showed signs of being standardized across their entire empire with little room for innovation or adaptation. Most troubling was their obvious contempt for what they called chaotic species like humanity. When Earth's Pride finally docked at Luna Station, Jake was immediately transported to Earth for emergency briefings. President Carlos Martinez had already been informed of the situation and had called together the Global Defense Council. The meeting took place in the secure chambers beneath Geneva, where Earth's military and scientific leaders gathered to hear the full report. General Amy Rodriguez presented Earth's military capabilities to the assembled group. 12 interstellar vessels made up humanity's entire deep space fleet. The largest was barely 1/10 the size of the alien ship that Jake had encountered. Earth's orbital defenses consisted of automated weapons platforms and shield generators that had never been tested against truly advanced technology. Dr. Grant shared her analysis of Zephyrian society and technology. She believed they were dealing with an ancient empire that had perfected the art of conquest through intimidation. Their standardized approach suggested they had never encountered serious resistance from any species they had conquered. The debate that followed lasted for 18 hours. Some council members argued for immediate surrender, believing that humanity could not possibly win against such overwhelming odds. Others demanded that Earth fight regardless of the consequences. A few suggested trying to negotiate for better terms or more time. President Martinez listened to every argument before making his decision. He would address the United Earth Assembly in 2 days and deliver humanity's official response to the Zephyrian ultimatum. In the meantime, all available resources would be devoted to preparing for whatever came next. Jake Morrison found himself appointed as special liaison between the military and the diplomatic corps. As he walked through the corridors of the Global Defense Council building, he thought about the choice facing humanity. Surrender meant survival, but also the end of human independence and the dreams of exploring the galaxy on their own terms. The alternative was a war that no military expert believed humanity could win. Ben Clark stared at the holographic display showing 50,000 red dots moving steadily toward Earth's solar system. Each dot represented a Zephyrian warship capable of destroying human cities from orbit. As Chief Strategy Officer for Earth's military forces, he was supposed to find a way to stop them with 12 ships and some orbital platforms. The math was simple and terrifying. Even if every human weapon worked perfectly and every shot destroyed an enemy ship, they would still face odds of over 4,000 to 1. Traditional military thinking offered no solutions except surrender or meaningless sacrifice. Dr. Nina Torres entered the strategy room carrying a stack of data tablets. She was Earth's leading specialist in artificial intelligence and had spent the last week analyzing every piece of information about Zephyrian technology and tactics. Her findings might change everything or confirm that humanity was doomed. Nina spread her tablets across the conference table and began explaining what she had discovered. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 847 different species, using essentially the same approach every time. They would arrive with overwhelming force, make their demands, and wait for the inevitable surrender. Any species foolish enough to resist was quickly crushed by standard tactics that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. This consistency was both their greatest strength and their most glaring weakness. Every Zephyrian ship followed identical design principles. Every weapon system operated according to the same specifications. Every tactical decision was made according to predetermined protocols that prioritized efficiency over adaptation. Ben leaned forward, studying the data with growing excitement. He had spent his career studying military history and knew that rigid thinking was often defeated by flexible tactics. The Zephyrians might have superior technology, but they appeared to lack the ability to think outside their established patterns. Nina continued her briefing, explaining that Zephyrian society seemed built around collective decision-making and standardized responses to problems. Individual creativity was discouraged in favor of proven solutions that had worked in the past. This made them incredibly effective against conventional opponents, but potentially vulnerable to unconventional approaches. The breakthrough came when Nina introduced her analysis of human psychological patterns compared to other known species. Humans showed unusual levels of adaptability, creativity, and what she politely called organized chaos. Where other species sought order and predictability, humans thrived in situations that required rapid improvisation and unconventional solutions. Ben began sketching ideas on his tablet as Nina talked. Instead of trying to match Zephyrian strength, with inferior human technology, they needed to leverage humanity's unique advantages. The key was to create situations where rigid thinking became a disadvantage and chaotic creativity became a weapon. Commander Alex Hayes joined the meeting fresh from his covert mission to study captured Zephyrian technology. his stealth ship. Silent Runner had managed to scan several alien vessels without being detected. The intelligence he brought back confirmed Nina's theories about standardized design and rigid operational procedures. Alex reported that Zephyrian ships were marvels of engineering, but showed no signs of field modifications or adaptive improvements. Every vessel of the same class was identical down to the smallest component. Their weapon systems were incredibly powerful, but operated within narrow parameters that never changed. More importantly, Alex had detected weaknesses in their sensor, arrays, and communication systems. The aliens relied heavily on predictable scanning patterns and standardized communication protocols. A sufficiently clever opponent might be able to exploit these limitations to achieve tactical surprise. Engineer Sam Cooper and physicist Dr. Kate Williams arrived with samples of Zephyrian technology that Alex had managed to acquire. They had spent days trying to understand how the alien devices worked, and their initial findings were encouraging. Zephyrian technology was definitely more advanced than human designs, but it was also more specialized. Each device had been optimized for specific functions and showed little flexibility for alternative uses. Human engineers traditionally built systems that could be modified, adapted, or repurposed as needed. This difference in design philosophy might provide unexpected advantages. Kate explained that Zephyrian energy weapons were incredibly efficient, but only against targets they were designed to engage. Their shields were nearly impenetrable when facing energy attacks, but might be vulnerable to kinetic weapons or unconventional assault methods. Sam had made an even more interesting discovery. Zephyrian control systems appeared to be programmed for logical decision trees that could be predicted and potentially manipulated. A clever hacker might be able to introduce chaos into their systems by feeding them contradictory data or impossible scenarios. The discussion was interrupted when young Ryan Bell burst into the meeting room. The 19-year-old programmer had been working on captured Zephyrian computer systems trying to understand their operating principles. His excitement was obvious as he explained what had happened during his latest experiment. Ryan had accidentally created a simple virus while trying to interface human computers with alien systems. The virus was designed to test logical pathways, but had somehow crashed an entire Zephyrian data network. The alien systems could not process the random elements that Ryan had included in his code and had simply shut down rather than risk making incorrect decisions. Ben felt pieces of a plan beginning to form in his mind. The Zephyrians expected humanity to fight like every other species they had conquered. They would arrive with their standard formations, use their proven tactics, and wait for the inevitable human collapse. But what if humanity refused to play by those rules? Nina began outlining what she called the Phantom Protocol. Instead of engaging in direct fleet combat where human forces would be annihilated, they would use hit-and-run tactics, guerrilla warfare, and psychological operations designed to create maximum confusion among enemy forces. The plan was audacious and probably insane. Human ships would avoid direct confrontation whenever possible, instead focusing on disrupting enemy communications, sabotaging supply lines, and creating chaos throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Meanwhile, human hackers would wage electronic warfare against alien computer systems, introducing viruses designed to exploit their rigid logical frameworks. Alex pointed out that this approach would require perfect coordination between military units that had never worked together before. They would need new communication protocols, new tactical doctrines, and extensive training for personnel who were used to conventional warfare. Ben smiled grimly as he looked around the room at the faces of Earth's defenders. They had 23 days to prepare for the arrival of the most powerful military force in galactic history. The plan they were developing had never been tried before and would require every human in the solar system to think and act in ways that no species had ever attempted. It was completely impossible and absolutely necessary, and somehow felt exactly like the kind of challenge that humanity was born to face. Colonel Dan Murphy watched the Zephyrian advance fleet emerge from hyperspace 3 days ahead of schedule. 15 massive troop transports accompanied by twice as many escort vessels hung in space beyond Luna's orbit like predatory birds waiting to strike. His base was about to become humanity's first real test against alien military might. Luna Base housed 3,000 military personnel, along with civilians who operated the mining facilities and research stations scattered across the moon's surface. Murphy had spent weeks preparing his defenses, but nothing could change the basic mathematics of the situation. 15,000 Zephyrian soldiers were coming to capture or destroy his base, and they possessed weapons that could melt through human armor like paper. Sergeant Lucy Adams finished inspecting the improvised barricades that her squad had constructed in the main corridor leading to the command center. Instead of standard military obstacles, she had used mining equipment, industrial machinery, and even furniture to create defensive positions that looked chaotic but provided overlapping fields of fire. The Zephyrian assault began exactly at dawn, according to Luna's artificial day cycle. Their landing craft descended in perfect formation, dispersing troops at predetermined intervals around the base perimeter. Murphy watched through security cameras as alien soldiers moved with mechanical precision toward their assigned objectives. Each Zephyrian warrior stood nearly 7 feet tall and wore armor that shimmered with energy fields. Their weapons fired coherent plasma beams that could punch through concrete walls and vaporize metal barriers. They advanced in textbook formations that any military academy would have praised for their efficiency and coordination. Lucy Adams and her squad waited in the mining tunnels beneath the main base structures. She had studied the alien approach patterns and noticed something interesting. The Zephyrians assumed that human defenders would be positioned in logical defensive positions like fortified bunkers and prepared firing positions. They had no contingency plans for enemies who might attack from unexpected directions using unconventional weapons. When the first group of alien soldiers entered the main corridor, Lucy triggered explosive charges that brought down sections of the ceiling. The Zephyrians found themselves trapped in a maze of debris where their superior weapons became less effective and their coordinated tactics were disrupted by the confined space. Dr. Maya Foster worked frantically in her laboratory analyzing fragments of Zephyrian armor and weapons that had been recovered from the initial skirmishes. As Luna Base's chief scientist, she was responsible for finding weaknesses that human defenders could exploit. Her discoveries would determine whether the base could hold out long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The alien armor was a masterpiece of defensive engineering designed to deflect or absorb energy weapons while protecting the wearer from environmental hazards. But Maya noticed something curious about its construction. The armor's energy fields were calibrated to handle specific types of attacks and showed reduced effectiveness against kinetic impacts from solid projectiles. Maya immediately contacted Murphy with her findings. Human energy weapons were almost useless against Zephyrian armor, but old-fashioned bullets fired at high velocity could penetrate the energy fields and damage the underlying protective layers. The base's security forces began switching to projectile weapons, while mining crews modified industrial equipment to launch chunks of metal and rock at attacking aliens. The siege entered its second day, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Zephyrian forces controlled most of the base's outer sections, but had been unable to breach the inner defensive perimeter. Their standard tactics were designed for quick, overwhelming victories against enemies who fought in predictable ways. The chaotic defensive strategy employed by human forces created problems that their rigid military doctrine could not easily solve. Lucy Adams led a night raid against a Zephyrian supply depot using weapons that would have been considered primitive by galactic standards. Her squad carried crossbows modified with explosive tips, along with slings that fired chunks of lunar rock. The alien sentries never thought to scan for such crude weapons, and the raid succeeded in destroying several shuttlecraft loaded with ammunition and supplies. Murphy realized that the key to victory lay not in matching Zephyrian firepower, but in forcing them to fight in ways that negated their technological advantages. He ordered his defenders to abandon fixed positions and adopt guerrilla tactics that turned the base's industrial infrastructure into a weapon against the invaders. Mining charges became improvised explosives that collapsed tunnels on advancing enemy troops. Heavy construction vehicles were converted into armored fighting machines that could ram through Zephyrian formations. Even the base's atmospheric processors were weaponized to create toxic gas clouds that forced alien soldiers to retreat to areas where human defenders waited in ambush. The psychological effect on the Zephyrian forces was becoming obvious. Their communications intercepts revealed growing confusion and frustration among enemy commanders who could not understand why. Their proven tactics were failing against such inferior opponents. Some alien units began requesting new orders while others seemed paralyzed by situations that fell outside their operational parameters. Maya Foster made another crucial discovery while examining captured Zephyrian equipment: the aliens' battle. Computers were programmed with extensive databases covering conventional military tactics used by hundreds of different species. But they had no data on guerrilla warfare improvised weapons or the kind of creative chaos that human defenders were employing. This knowledge gap was creating cascading failures throughout the Zephyrian command structure. Officers trained to follow predetermined battle plans found themselves facing scenarios that simply did not exist in their tactical manuals. Some units began withdrawing from positions they should have held, while others attacked objectives that no longer had strategic value. By the third day of the siege, the situation had completely reversed. Zephyrian forces still outnumbered human defenders by 5-1 and possessed far superior individual weapons. But they were trapped in a base where every corridor had become a maze, every room contained potential ambushes, and every piece of equipment might explode without warning. Lucy Adams discovered that many Zephyrian soldiers were beginning to surrender. Rather than continue fighting an enemy they could not predict or understand. These prisoners revealed that their species had never encountered opponents who fought without following established military doctrine. The concept of improvised tactics and adaptive strategy was completely foreign to their way of thinking. When Earth's reinforcement fleet finally arrived, they found Luna Base still under human control, surrounded by confused and demoralized Zephyrian forces who seemed more interested in evacuating than continuing their attack. The victory sent shockwaves through the approaching main alien fleet as commanders tried to understand how their advance forces had been defeated by such primitive opponents. Murphy stood in his damaged command center surveying the debris and improvised fortifications that had saved his base. The siege of Luna Base had proven that humanity could fight and win against superior alien technology. More importantly, it had revealed that the Zephyrian Empire's greatest weakness was their inability to adapt when faced with opponents who refused to fight according to established rules. Tracy Kim stared at the quantum communication array that her team had constructed in the abandoned asteroid mining station. The massive ring of crystalline components hummed with energy as it prepared to launch humanity's most dangerous gambit. In 6 hours, the main Zephyrian fleet would arrive in Earth's solar system, and Tracy planned to turn their greatest advantage into their most crippling weakness. The Zephyrian Empire's power came from their ability to coordinate thousands of ships across vast distances using instantaneous quantum communication networks. Every vessel in their fleet was connected to every other vessel through quantum entanglement that allowed real-time tactical coordination. This system had never been successfully attacked because no species had ever understood how it worked. Tracy's team included some of Earth's most brilliant minds turned to destructive purposes. Eric Stone had been the galactic champion of strategic gaming simulations before dedicating his skills to cyber warfare. Mia Johnson was a reformed criminal who had once penetrated the security systems of every major corporation on Earth before agreeing to work for global defense instead of personal profit. Their plan was theoretically simple but practically insane. They would hack into the Zephyrian quantum network and introduce what they called chaos algorithms. These programs were designed to spread through the alien communication system like a virus, causing ships to receive contradictory orders, navigation systems to malfunction, and tactical computers to make impossible decisions. The breakthrough had come when Ryan Bell discovered that Zephyrian computer systems could not process random or illogical data without shutting down. Their artificial intelligence was based on pure logic trees that assumed all problems had optimal solutions that could be calculated and implemented. Human chaos algorithms would force the alien systems to choose between equally logical but contradictory options. Tracy activated the quantum array and felt the strange sensation of her consciousness touching something vast and alien. The Zephyrian network stretched across thousands of light years, connecting millions of devices in a web of instantaneous communication. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely unprepared for what humanity was about to unleash upon it. Eric launched the first wave of chaos algorithms through carefully mapped pathways in the alien network. The programs were disguised as routine communication protocols, but contained seeds of randomness that would multiply and spread through every connected system. Within minutes, Zephyrian ships throughout the galaxy would begin receiving impossible orders and contradictory information. Captain Noah Parker commanded the carrier New Horizon as it led humanity's small fleet in hit-and-run attacks against the scattered advance elements of the Zephyrian force. His 12 ships were hopelessly outnumbered, but they possessed one advantage that the enemy could never match. Human pilots could make split-second decisions, adapt to changing circumstances, and improvise tactics that no computer could predict. The chaos algorithms were already having their intended effect on Zephyrian formations. Enemy ships that should have been coordinating their movements were instead following conflicting navigation data. Some vessels accelerated toward targets that no longer existed, while others retreated from threats that were purely imaginary. Parker's tactical display showed the beautiful confusion spreading through enemy ranks as alien commanders tried to restore order to systems that were designed to be perfectly logical. The Zephyrian fleet was tearing itself apart without firing a single shot at human targets. Mia Johnson monitored the deeper levels of the alien network, where she had planted more sophisticated viruses designed to corrupt the Empire's central databases. These programs would introduce subtle errors into historical records, tactical manuals, and strategic assessments. Over time, the accumulated damage would make it impossible for Zephyrian commanders to trust any information from their own systems. The psychological warfare aspect of their attack was proving more effective than anyone had dared hope. Intercepted. Communications revealed growing panic among alien officers who could no longer rely on the technological systems that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. Some ships were going completely silent rather than risk receiving corrupted orders. Admiral Vextar's flagship appeared on long-range sensors as it emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. The massive vessel was nearly a mile long and bristled with weapons capable of sterilizing entire planets. But even this mighty warship was not immune to the chaos spreading through the Zephyrian network. Tracy detected the moment when her algorithms reached the flagship's communication array, the quantum entanglement connection that linked Vextar to his scattered fleet suddenly became a conduit for impossible paradoxes and logical contradictions. The Admiral's tactical computers began generating battle plans that contradicted each other, while his navigation systems plotted courses to destinations that did not exist. Parker seized the opportunity to strike at the heart of the enemy formation, while their command structure was paralyzed by electronic chaos. New Horizon and its escort vessels accelerated toward the Zephyrian flagship using asteroid fields and sensor shadows to mask their approach. The alien point defense systems that should have destroyed them were offline, trying to resolve impossible targeting solutions. The human fleet's missiles struck Vextar's flagship at the moment when its defensive systems were caught in recursive logic loops, trying to decide between equally valid but contradictory threat assessments. The damage was relatively minor, but the psychological impact was devastating. The mighty Zephyrian Empire had been successfully attacked by primitive opponents using weapons that should never have penetrated their defenses. Eric Stone reported that the Chaos algorithms had now infected over 60% of the alien fleet. Ships were breaking formation, attacking their own support vessels, and in some cases, simply shutting down all systems rather than continue operating with corrupted data. The perfect coordination that made Zephyrian forces unstoppable was becoming their greatest vulnerability. The turning point came when intercepted communications revealed that some alien commanders were beginning to question the fundamental assumptions of their military doctrine. Officers who had never made independent decisions were forced to choose between following obviously corrupted orders or violating their programming by thinking for themselves. Vextar himself appeared on open communication channels demanding to speak with human commanders. His image showed signs of the strain that prolonged exposure to Chaos algorithms was having on Zephyrian neural patterns. The rigid logical framework that governed alien thinking was beginning to crack under the pressure of dealing with truly random and unpredictable events. Tracy realized that they had achieved something far more significant than a military victory. The Chaos algorithms were not just disrupting Zephyrian technology, but fundamentally changing how individual aliens thought about problems and decisions. Some enemy personnel were actually beginning to display creativity and independent judgment for the first time in their species' history. The network war concluded not with the destruction of the alien fleet, but with its gradual transformation. Zephyrian ships, whose crews had been infected with human-style thinking, began withdrawing from combat not because they were ordered to retreat, but because individual officers made personal decisions that fighting was no longer logical or desirable. Parker's fleet found itself in the unprecedented position of accepting surrender from enemy forces that outnumbered them by thousands to one. The mighty Zephyrian war machine was collapsing, not because it had been defeated in battle, but because its personnel could no longer function within the rigid hierarchical structure that had once made them invincible. Tracy Kim stood before her quantum communication array, knowing that she had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization. The Chaos algorithms would continue spreading through alien networks for years to come, introducing concepts of individual choice, creative thinking, and adaptive problem-solving to species that had never experienced such freedoms. The war was far from over, but humanity had already won the most important victory by proving that even the most powerful empire could be transformed by exposure to the beautiful chaos of human consciousness. Commander Holly Brooks stood in the emergency command center buried 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains as reports poured in from around the globe. 8,000 Zephyrian warships had broken through the outer system defenses and were approaching Earth for what their commanders promised would be the final assault. The alien fleet was damaged and confused by the Chaos algorithms, but still possessed enough firepower to reduce human civilization to radioactive ash. President Martinez had declared global martial law and ordered the evacuation of all major population centers. 2 billion people were streaming into underground shelters that had been constructed during the early days of the crisis. The remaining billion had volunteered to stay on the surface, maintaining critical infrastructure and preparing for the kind of last stand that would be remembered for whatever remained of human history. Captain Victor Lee coordinated the defense of Earth's orbital platforms from his position aboard the command station Unity. His mixed fleet of military vessels, civilian spacecraft, and converted cargo haulers looked pathetic compared to the approaching alien armada. But Lee had learned from the victories at Luna Base and throughout the outer system that superior firepower meant nothing if it could not be applied effectively. The key to human success had been the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when faced with impossible circumstances. Every man, woman, and child on Earth had become part of the war effort, not because they were ordered to fight, but because they chose to defend their home and their freedom against any odds. Engineer Tom Bradley worked frantically in the orbital shipyard, converting luxury passenger liners into weapons platforms. His team included retired engineers, teenagers with technical skills, and even artists who contributed creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The ships they produced were ugly, inefficient, and completely unpredictable, which made them perfect weapons against an enemy that relied on logical analysis. Retired pilot Grace Turner led a squadron of volunteers flying obsolete fighter craft that should have been in museums rather than combat zones. At 67 years old, she was twice the age of most military pilots, but possessed something that youth and training could not provide. Grace had spent decades learning to improvise, adapt, and overcome mechanical failures with nothing but experience and determination. Her squadron included former military personnel, civilian pilots, and even teenagers who had learned to fly in simulation games. They flew ancient atmospheric fighters that had been hastily modified for space combat using weapons that were primitive by galactic standards. But they possessed the one advantage that no alien force could match, which was the absolute refusal to give up when facing impossible odds. Aaron Reed was barely 16 years old, but had spent his entire life playing strategic games that required split-second decision-making and creative problem-solving. When the global defense forces needed drone operators, he volunteered along, with thousands of other young people who possessed skills that traditional military training could not provide. Aaron's gaming experience translated perfectly to controlling swarms of defensive drones that harassed Zephyrian formations using tactics that no military computer could predict. His drones flew in patterns that seemed completely random, but actually followed intuitive strategies that confused alien targeting systems and disrupted enemy attack formations. The most unexpected weapon in humanity's arsenal was discovered by Dr. Laura Casey while studying Zephyrian prisoners captured during earlier battles. She found that prolonged exposure to human conversation and thinking patterns actually caused physical changes in alien brain structures. The rigid neural pathways that allowed Zephyrians to function in their hierarchical society began to break down when exposed to human creativity and chaos. This discovery led to the most unusual military strategy in galactic history: human prisoners. Aboard alien ships began deliberately engaging their captors in conversations designed to introduce concepts of individual choice, personal freedom, and creative problem-solving. These discussions were literally infectious, spreading through Zephyrian crews like a mental virus that corrupted their ability to follow orders without question. The final assault on Earth began with a massive bombardment that lit up the night sky with energy beams and missile explosions. Zephyrian forces expected to overwhelm human defenses within hours and proceed with the systematic destruction of major population centers. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to multiply rather than diminish under pressure. Grace Turner's fighter squadron engaged the leading edge of the alien formation using tactics that defied every principle of conventional warfare. Her ancient fighters dove through enemy formations, firing primitive missiles and projectile weapons, while performing maneuvers that should have been impossible for aircraft of their design. The Zephyrian pilots found themselves unable to predict or counter attacks that followed no logical pattern. Tom Bradley's converted passenger ships proved equally effective, despite their obvious limitations. The aliens had prepared to fight military vessels with standardized weapons and predictable capabilities. They had no tactical doctrine for dealing with luxury liners armed with improvised weapons and operated by crews that included cooks, janitors, and retired school teachers. Aaron Reed's drone swarms created chaos throughout the Zephyrian formation by attacking targets in sequences that made no strategic sense but maximized psychological disruption. His drones would ignore high-value military targets to attack supply vessels or would coordinate complex maneuvers that served no purpose except to demonstrate human unpredictability. The breakthrough came when several Zephyrian ships began broadcasting surrender signals, not because they had been militarily defeated, but because their crews could no longer function as part of a coordinated military force. The human conversations had spread throughout the alien fleet, introducing concepts that were fundamentally incompatible with Zephyrian social structure. Individual alien soldiers were making personal decisions for the first time in their species' history. Some chose to continue fighting while others laid down their weapons, and others simply abandoned their posts to explore their newfound capacity for independent thought. The rigid hierarchy that made Zephyrian forces invincible was collapsing as individual aliens learned to think for themselves. Admiral Vextar himself appeared on communication channels, repeatedly trying to restore order to forces that no longer understood the concept of absolute obedience. His own thinking had been affected by prolonged exposure to human chaos algorithms, and he found himself questioning orders and strategies that had once seemed obviously correct. Holly Brooks watched from her underground command center as the tide of battle turned not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the simple power of human consciousness to transform everything it touched. The Zephyrian Empire was not being conquered, but converted as individual aliens discovered the terrifying and wonderful freedom of making their own choices. The war was ending not with humanity's defeat, but with the liberation of their enemies from the prison of their own rigid thinking. Victory belonged not to the side with better weapons, but to the species that understood that consciousness and creativity were the most powerful forces in the universe. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth grow larger on the main display screen. 3 months ago, he had arrived at this same planet with 50,000 warships and absolute confidence in the superiority of the Zephyrian Empire. Now he approached with a white flag broadcasting on all frequencies, and a message that would have been impossible for him to understand before his mind had been changed by exposure to human thinking. The great warships of his fleet hung motionless in space around him, but they were no longer the disciplined formation that had terrorized 800 different species across the galaxy. Individual Zephyrian commanders were making their own decisions about formations tactics, and even whether to continue following orders from the central command structure. The mighty war machine that had conquered most of the galaxy was transforming into something completely new. President Martinez received the alien admiral in the same chamber where he had declared humanity's refusal to surrender just 4 months earlier. The human leader looked tired but confident as he faced the creature that had once threatened to annihilate his entire species. Between them sat a document that would change the course of galactic history. The Treaty of Earth's Dawn established humanity not as conquered subjects or even as equals, but as teachers. The Zephyrian Empire officially recognized that human consciousness possessed unique qualities that could benefit all intelligent species throughout the galaxy. Humanity would serve as chaos teachers, helping rigid civilizations learn the arts of creativity, adaptation, and independent thought. Vextar signed the treaty with appendages that still shook slightly from the neural changes that exposure to human consciousness had caused in his brain structure. He was no longer the absolute military commander who had arrived at Earth with orders to destroy or enslave humanity. The rigid logical frameworks that had governed his thinking for centuries had been replaced by something far more complex and infinitely more interesting. Dr. Laura Casey established the Interspecies Adaptation Institute in the former military headquarters that had coordinated Earth's defense. Her mission was to develop systematic methods for introducing creative thinking to species that had evolved within rigid hierarchical structures. The early results were promising as volunteer subjects from dozens of different alien races showed rapid improvements in problem-solving abilities and individual initiative. Captain Jake Morrison received promotion to Admiral and command of humanity's expanding diplomatic fleet. His first mission was to visit the former Zephyrian colonies, where human representatives would help newly liberated species adjust to the concept of self-governance. Many of these worlds had been subjects of the Empire for thousands of years, and had never experienced freedom or individual choice. The irony was not lost on any human observer that they had won the war not through superior violence, but by liberating their enemies from the prison of their own thinking. Species that had been enslaved by the Zephyrian Empire for millennia were discovering that their former masters had been just as trapped by rigid thinking as their subjects had been by direct oppression. Commander Alex Hayes led the first joint human Zephyrian exploration mission to the galaxy's outer rim, where reports suggested the existence of other ancient empires built on the same principles of absolute order and hierarchical control. His crew included both species working together to spread the concepts of creative chaos and individual freedom to civilizations that had never experienced either. The transformation was not limited to military and political structures. Zephyrian art, which had remained unchanged for thousands of years, suddenly exploded with new forms and expressions as individual artists learned to create according to personal vision, rather than established standards. Their music began incorporating the random elements and emotional complexity that made human compositions so compelling. Tracy Kim continued her work with quantum communication networks, but now her goal was construction rather than destruction. She was building new systems that could carry the chaos algorithms to distant parts of the galaxy, where they would introduce concepts of individual choice and creative thinking to species that had never imagined such possibilities existed. The most remarkable change occurred in Zephyrian society itself, as individuals who had never questioned orders or made independent decisions began forming new types of social structures based on cooperation rather than domination. The empire that had conquered most of the galaxy was voluntarily dissolving as its component species chose freedom over security. Ryan Bell found himself in charge of a team that included the galaxy's most brilliant programmers from dozens of different species. Their mission was to develop artificial intelligence systems that could think creatively rather than just logically. The early prototypes showed promise, but also displayed the unpredictable behavior patterns that made human consciousness so effective against rigid thinking. Grace Turner became the first human instructor at the Zephyrian Military Academy, where she taught alien officers the principles of improvised tactics and adaptive strategy. Her students struggled with concepts that seemed chaotic and inefficient, but gradually learned to appreciate the advantages of flexible thinking in complex situations. 5 years after the end of the war, Commander Hayes stood on the bridge of Earth's newest vessel, the USS Liberation, preparing to depart for the Andromeda Galaxy. Reports suggested that entire civilizations there existed under conditions similar to what the Zephyrian Empire had imposed, and they needed exposure to the liberating chaos of human consciousness. Beside Hayes stood former Admiral Vex Tar, who now served as Earth's first alien diplomatic advisor. The former enemy had learned to appreciate the beautiful unpredictability of human thinking and was eager to share these discoveries with species that remained trapped in rigid hierarchical structures. President Martinez addressed the United Galaxy, Federation, from the same podium where he had once declared humanity's defiance of impossible odds. The organization included representatives from over 300 different species, all of whom had been liberated from various forms of mental and political oppression through exposure to human chaos algorithms. The final irony of the war became clear as Martinez delivered his closing remarks to the assembled delegates. The Zephyrian Empire had been correct in their assessment that humanity was too chaotic and unpredictable to fit into their ordered galactic civilization. But they had failed to understand that this chaos was not a weakness to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated and shared. The war that no one thought possible had been won, not through superior weapons or tactics, but through the simple recognition that consciousness and creativity were the most powerful forces in the universe. Humanity had faced impossible odds and discovered that the real victory lay not in defeating their enemies, but in transforming them into friends. The galaxy would never be the same because humans had proven that even the most rigid thinking could be changed by exposure to the infinite possibilities of creative consciousness. The species that had once faced extinction had become the teachers of freedom to civilizations spanning thousands of star systems. In the end, humanity won, not because they were better warriors, but because they understood something that no other species had discovered. True victory came not from conquering others, but from liberating them to discover their own unlimited potential for growth, change, and creative expression in a universe full of infinite possibilities.